So Dana White's Contender Series 2024 is going to be taking place at some point in the second half of next year. And I think that there's going to be a lot of fighters from Australia on that Contender Series. Like we saw a couple, including Tom Nolan. And Tom Nolan has become a pretty big star for Australia. And I think that he can go pretty far. So what I've done is I've recruited a very knowledgeable person on this area, BennyPMMA. He's got a YouTube channel and a Twitter, if you can go and follow him there. What do you think about a lot of people that could be on the Contender Series next year from Australia, Benny P?
Hey, thanks for having me, Artem and me. The amount of talent on the regional scene at the moment, I think we're in a golden age of talent for Australia and New Zealand, and there are so many prospects that I've never been this excited for up and coming Australian and New Zealand fighters. So yeah.
Yeah, I think 2024 is going to be a pretty big year for fighters that are from Australia that are already in the UFC and fighters from Australia that will potentially be in the UFC. And I thought I'd bring up the first one. I think Abdullah Bieda is a guy that really should be a bit of a shoe-in to be on the Contender Series. He's a guy I've talked about for a while, mainly just due to his massive frame for his weight class. He's 6'3" at 145 pounds, and he's got some pretty good wins. What do you have to say about Abdullah, Benny P?
So Abdullah Baeda, like you mentioned his frame and all that sort of stuff. The one thing that is hard to find out is what this guy's reach is, because you hear it's as high as 80 centimeters, 80 inches, sorry, in reach, and then you also hear it as low as 75 inches. At the very least, he has a very much higher than average reach for a featherweight. Very deceptive power. Honestly, he reminds me of like a featherweight version of Jarlin Turner, both in build and just overall power. He's got that, that lanky power, and he's actually got some really good cardio. You'd think because he's such a big guy and, it looked like he'd be cutting a lot of weight. He's actually very, very durable, has very good cardio, and he can push a really good pace, especially in the later rounds.
Yeah, I think Bieda is definitely a good fighter. I think he's a guy that is UFC level, and I think that he is a guy that when he gets into the UFC, honestly, his size alone would probably draw a lot of attention because there's not many 6'3" featherweights out there. I'm very excited to see Bieda in the UFC or on the Contender Series in 2024. The next fighter that I thought that we should talk about is Cam Roston. And the real big reason why I thought I'd bring him up is just because he was on the Dana White's Contender Series 2023, but he did have to pull out of that fight for some reason against Chad Hanekom, and a different fight was made. But he does have that city kickboxing connection. He does train out of city kickboxing. He has won a few kickboxing tournaments over here in New Zealand. He does have a bit of a grappling base as well. He can kind of do it all. But the kickboxing very recently has gone much better since he joined CKB. Do you have anything to add about Cam Roston and how you think maybe he could do in the UFC if he was to get signed at some point?
So I think his overall skill set is very solid. He's got obviously started as a grappler, and I do like that CKB move for him to get his striking up and everything. Obviously, the one worry I do have about Cam Rouston is the level of competition he's faced. Obviously, he hasn't fought the highest level of competition. But besides that, I do think he has a good skill set, and his two losses, Jacob Malkoon and Izzy Izzy Fanatu, aren't horrible losses at all. And yeah, just with all the CKB and kickboxing experience, I think his well-roundedness could probably get him pretty far in the middleweight division. I think he would beat guys like, Cody Brundage if he's still there by the time Cam Rouston was to debut. And yeah, I think I think his learning, the way he learns and his will to learn can probably take him really far.
Yeah, I think Ralston's definitely an interesting prospect for those reasons that you did bring up. Hopefully he does manage to get another opportunity on the Contender Series in 2024. We probably will potentially see him fight maybe one more time before that time rolls around, since the Contender Series, I think, is rumored for like August, October start, very late in 2024. Maybe Cam Roston could be someone that they bring up. But Aaron Toe is a guy that I feel like I've been talking about for, I almost want to say, like almost 2 years now. At least a year I've been bringing up Aaron Toe as a guy that I think could make it from New Zealand into the UFC. A guy that does train out of Dan Hooker's personal gym, well, the gym that Dan Hooker does own. He's got the CKB connection as well. Once again with Aaron Toe, he hasn't really fought the best competition in the world, but he has been beating a lot of these guys in the way that you probably do want to see him win. He's beating a lot of guys by knockout. He's looking really good on the feet. I mean, training with CKB, you're just naturally going to get some really good striking in. He's got amateur experience as well. Aaron Toe, as you mentioned to me off camera, he did have a mixed rules bout as well, a mix of kickboxing and MMA. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with him. I would like to see him fight at some point, hopefully early 2023, and then get the opportunity on the contender series, because I do believe that Aaron Toe is a guy that could make it out of New Zealand into the UFC, and he definitely is a guy that is close with Dan Hooker, who is a pretty successful fighter from New Zealand. What do you think about Aaron Toe, Benny P?
Yeah, so I do like his aggressiveness. I've seen a lot of comparisons to Aaron Toes, like a bantamweight version of Dan Hooker. Would you agree with that? Like, obviously trains with Dan Hooker. Would you agree he's got sort of a similar style to Dan Hooker for a bantamweight?
Yeah, good kind of rangy striking, good at keeping it on the feet, can grapple if he needs to. Pretty similar skill set all around there, yeah.
And obviously his power for a bantamweight is pretty. He's got some really fucking devastating power as well, from what I've seen. But also, like you mentioned, not the greatest level of competition, but still a solid fight. He passes the eye test, in my opinion.
Yeah, yeah, he looks like I mean of course he does, but he looks like he knows what he's doing, even though he's not fighting the best competition. I would like to see a step up, but that is of course what the contender series is for. Hopefully we can just see him fight again in MMA early 2024, I guess I should say, sorry. And then on the contender series would be most ideal for me as a fan to watch him. The next one is Justin Van Heerden. You might have a lot more to say about Justin Van Heerden, but I will do a little bit of a brief introduction. He is a champion at Internal MMA, very, very successful fighter since moving over, since moving gyms. He has fought all around the world, having a good run right now, 5 fight win streak. Was very prepared to fight on very short notice on the Israel Adesanya Sean Strickland card. Was calling for a fight all week. I was getting hyped that we're gonna see him make a debut on that card. Unfortunately, the call never really came. But I think Justin Van Heerden's a guy that, despite not having the best record in the world, is on a good run. And I will hand it over to you now, Benny P, because you do definitely know more about Van Heerden than I do.
So Justin Van Heerden, you know, if you look at his record, you're probably thinking, what's so special about this guy? He's got 5 losses. His like I mentioned it with Cam Rowson, his will to learn, his will to improve. Justin Van Heerden went to freestyle MMA, obviously the same gym as Alexander Volkanovski, and since then he's really improved his striking. You know, he before that his striking he couldn't really go to his striking, but in his last fight he actually knocked Rod Costa out cold, who's on the regional scene is actually known for his durability. Pretty sure first person to finish Rod Costa with strikes, and obviously Rod Costa was the last person to beat him before that. Avenged 2 of his losses, avenged the Diego Pajea loss, and, and then yeah, and also like I say, avenged the Rod Costa loss, and yeah, he's just been on a run, really rapidly improved, and yeah, his like I say, the things I've heard from people from freestyle MMA just mentioned it. He's apparently up there with Volk, like he's the second guy to Volk in freestyle at the moment. So yeah, obviously very good fighter, and yeah, out of freestyle as well. So
Definitely a guy that you would like to see get the opportunity. Represents South Africa and Australia as well, so you're gonna get quite a bit of representation from different areas of the world. So a lot of people will tune in to see him fight, whether it is in the UFC or in the Contender Series. Justin Van Heerden, he's managed to get it done at Eternal MMA, become the champion, had a lot of success there. I would like to see him in the UFC at some point. He's in his prime or entering his prime right now at the age of 29. The next one, though, that we will mention kind of had a big coming out party in his last fight. Jonathan Mikalev, 5-0 as a fighter, very recently beat a fighter that I was personally very high on in Joseph Luciano. I thought Joseph Luciano was going to be a guy that was going to make it far. I still believe that you will see Luciano in the UFC, but Jonathan Mikalev kind of took away the hype that Luciano did have. And now Mikalev is the guy that we're talking about that could be a guy that the UFC is looking at for the Dana White's Contender Series in 2024. What can you tell us about this prospect, Jonathan Mikalev?
So yeah, like you say, completely stole the show against Joseph Luciano. Wasn't expecting that performance at all. Obviously, being so high on Joseph Luciano, nobody was giving him a shot in that fight. Nobody was giving Mikalev a shot. I wasn't giving Mikalev a shot. But the best way I can describe that performance was Kamaru Usman's performance over Tyron Woodley. This is like the Australian regional scene. equivalent to this. He went out there, stuffed every takedown from Luciano, who's taken down almost every single person he's fought, stuffed every takedown, beat him up on the feet, took down Luciano himself, beat him up on the ground, showed amazing cardio, good pressure, won every single round dominantly against his best opponent. Yeah. And then his other wins. Jack James is a solid fighter in his own right, beats him. His one loss on the amateur scene was a really bad robbery, in my opinion. Should have won that fight clearly, in my opinion. He's just a really solid guy, and I can't believe I wasn't higher on this guy earlier. But yeah, definitely worth going through a deep dive of his career. Really solid prospect.
Yeah, he definitely definitely surprised me because as you guys know who might have seen a couple of my previous videos, Luciano was a guy I was high on, and then Mikalev went out there and took his hype, and hopefully Mikalev can get another fight in, or maybe two, before he does end up on the Contender Series eventually. I'm saying it because I do believe there's a very good chance we will see this guy. Hopefully we can get just maybe one more fight even on the Contender Series, a little bit more experience, and then we can see him in the UFC because I think he's a very good, talented fighter. Quillan Salkeed is a fighter that was meant to have a big experience, I guess a big opportunity on road to UFC last year. Unfortunately, that was taken away from him because his opponent, Jae-Hyun Park, was actually pulled from his fight on very, very short notice, I believe the night before the fight, to fight against Shin Haraguchi in an opportunity to then be on the road to UFC finals. So Quillan Salkeed kind of got, I guess, robbed of the opportunity to fight in front of the big names, in front of the big boys like Dana White, Sean Shelby, and the president of UFC in Asia as well. Unfortunately, he did lose that opportunity there, but I think that he can get another opportunity, let's say, on the Contender Series in 2024. I mean, if they called him up for the Road to UFC tournament, they absolutely know who Quillan Salkeed is. He's got good wins as well. Blake Donnelly is a guy that I have been high on in the past. Don Marfan is a bit of a staple of the Australian regional scene. You do see this guy fight every now and then. Pretty fun fighter to watch, in my opinion. He did kind of come back from that road to UFC, I guess, disappointment with a win. So at 5-1, very young as well, 23 years old. I think we could see him go. What do you have to say about Quillan Salkeed?
So very, very high on Quillan Salkeld. Going through his record, you'll see on his amateurs that he actually has a win over a fighter we mentioned before, Abdallah Bayeda. And that fight, obviously upper weight class, the Bayeda's not used to fighting it, but absolutely mauled Bayeda, who, like you say, very great fighter in his own right. Uh, his one loss, he sort of just made a silly mistake in that fight. He was fighting one of the best jiu-jitsu practitioners in the country, and he made a bit of a mistake there. But outside of that, he's learned from his mistakes, obviously, against Don Marfan, who is a great jiu-jitsu artist himself, and who is actually rematching early next year. And I think with a win there, we'll probably see this guy on Dana White Contender Series. But this guy's well-roundedness is great to see. And if you watch his last fight against Brett Pascoe, his cardio and pace and everything there, it's like he has four lungs the way he fights. He fights at such a crazy pace. His sprawls are elite. Like I'm not even like exaggerating. His sprawling game is elite in my opinion. And yeah, he really went in there, got a 50-43 decision win over an American opponent. And yeah, obviously showed his KO power against Blake Donnelly too. Really, he's really sharpening up his game, and obviously very young, only 23 years of age. So the improvements will be rapid.
Definitely excited to see how he goes. So we've got another very young fighter from Australia who's actually at the moment fighting over in LFA and has been beating some pretty good fighters over there in the LFA. We've got Isaac Thompson, who's only 21 years old. He is a featherweight, and he's having a lot of success now that he's moved on over to the LFA. Recently beat AJ Robb, which was going to be a bit of a test for him. Now, I did look into that fight, and I did pick Isaac Thompson. Very happy that I did, because he did get the win. But he's had some tough fights that he moved over to LFA, took on this guy called Larian Douglas, who had much more experience than him, an 8-4 record. Might not look the best on paper, but at the end of the day, it's a winning record with 12 pro fights. At that time Isaac Thompson had only had 5. And then he just went out there, looked really good against AJ Robb. I think that we see Isaac Thompson maybe not on the Contender Series, like maybe not in 2024, maybe in 2024 to be honest, but maybe next year as well, just because he is so young, 21 years old, trains out of Team Alpha Male, getting good training in there. What do you think about Isaac Thompson?
Yeah, I generally, I actually hadn't heard about this guy until his fight on LFA, the head kick KO he got. And after that, I did a whole deep dive of his career. Really impressed with his striking. Has a K1 background. You got to mention the age as well. Only 21 years old, and he's looking this good. Like he's looking like a solid competitor. His last win over AJ Robb was actually his only losses. AJ Robb's only losses were to former UFC fighters. So for him to go and beat him, and show he's at that level as those UFC fighters, yeah, I'm generally really high on the guy. Really good striking, and he showed his grappling against Rob, and this was at high altitude. Even at high altitude, solid cardio, didn't gas out or anything, and yeah, trained all over the world, got all this different experience, and yeah, I like him out of Team Alpha Male. Seems like he's really working on his grappling, and also his one loss, I reckon, was bullshit. I feel like that was an early stoppage in my biased opinion.
All right, that's Isaac Thompson, only 21 years old, a very bright prospect, very young, definitely someone to keep your eye out for. He's actually just a little bit older than me, so there you go. Makes me feel really good about myself. No, I'm just kidding. But anyway, Cody Haddon, another young prospect, 25 years old, a bantamweight, and another guy that has had from Australia decent amateur experience. Went 5-0 as an amateur, got that experience in, and then has gone on to have a pretty good run as a pro with his one loss to Steve Erceg. And Steve Erceg's pretty good, right? He's now ranked at flyweight in the UFC. Definitely a guy, and Steve Erceg to keep your eye out for in 2024, because he had a massive 2023 getting the UFC contract. Maybe you'll see him move on to have quite a bit of success. But he had a good fight against Erceg, in my opinion. I thought Haddon showed, especially in hindsight, now that we know how good Erceg is, I thought Haddon had a good performance. He's now moved on to having a lot of good, very good performances with KOs in the first round. He was meant to fight against Sean Gorsey, which would have been a really good test. But what do you have to say about Cody Haddon, the young prospect bantamweight from Australia?
So Cody Haddon, one thing that his Tapology page won't tell you about this guy, I think he has about over 20, 30 amateur boxing matches with a massive winning record. Really solid boxing, has a bunch of jiu-jitsu credentials as well. Really well-rounded, really strong guy as well for a bantamweight, really powerful. And yeah, like you mentioned with that Steve Erceg fight, had a way more competitive fight with Steve Erceg than David Dvorak did. And I would even argue that Costa did as well. Really solid. Obviously, also that fight against Erceg was on short notice for both men. So and since then, him and Steve Erceg have actually been training together, getting in hard rounds. So to have those rounds with the one guy you've lost to, who can help you improve on your game, help you with your grappling, help with all them flaws. I think the sky's the limit for this guy. Like this is going to be a very biased opinion, but I generally believe if you signed Cody Haddon right now, he would beat Raul Rosas Jr. But I am very biased here. We come from the same place, we're from the same city, but yeah, I think he's a really good prospect to look out for. Really good gym as well. Trains with Colin Salkield as well, and gives them the hardest rounds apparently, even knowing there's a two-way difference between them.
I was gonna just add to what you said about that Steve Erceg and them training together. One thing that I've noticed in Erceg's transition over to the UFC is that his striking has looked a lot better than it did on the regional scene, and Erceg is actually using his striking in the UFC to win fights, which is really impressive coming from Erceg, who does have a primary grappling background. And yes, you could say that Haddon's getting better at grappling as well because he's getting those rounds in with Erceg. So both guys working together to make each other better. I mean, Erceg, we know that he's a top 15 flyweight in the world now, so Cody Haddon, if he keeps on training with Erceg, you could see maybe Haddon have a pretty similar experience if he was to get the opportunity to get into the UFC. And now we've got a fighter from New Zealand. It is Matt Vale or Matt Vile. He's 12-2 from New Zealand, 32 years old. Hasn't really been fighting too much recently, but at the end of the day, there's not too many guys from New Zealand that have his amount of experience in MMA that do have a great winning record like he does as well. Now, Matt Vale hasn't really fought much at all. He's fought like twice since 2018, which isn't really the best, but he was meant to fight against Joseph Luciano, and that would have been a real tester, and that would have told us how good he really is. But he did beat Will Chope, who just fights anyone, anywhere at this point. Beat him in 90 seconds by finish. He did lose to Takashi Sato, who didn't have a good run in the UFC at all. But at the end of the day, Sato was still a solid striker, and he still did have at least a couple wins in the UFC, so that loss isn't that bad. The reason why I do bring up Matt Viley, though, really just truly is because if we're going to get some more guys from New Zealand, where I'm from, we're probably going to have to start looking into guys like Matt Viley, who does have a very good record, who does have good talent, who does have the ability to finish fights as well, and has beaten a good fighter. Like, I know Will Chope at this point is very experienced. Probably his best days are behind him, but he was in the UFC at one point. He has fought all over the world. He has got a lot of experience. Beat him in 90 seconds. Not many people can say that they did that. Do you have anything to add about Matt Viley?
So one thing I will say about Valley, if you've seen when his fight with Luciano got cancelled, one thing this guy's got, he's got a massive fucking fan base. This guy's fan base, he's got some really passionate fans. Every Luciano post was full of hate comments. So if the UFC want to sign this guy, just sign him for his fan base because this guy's got some of the most passionate fans I've seen in the whole Australian, New Zealand regional scene. Just full stop.
I reckon what they could do is maybe do like Kai Kara France versus someone in New Zealand and then sign Matt Viley to make his debut on that card. I think that would make a lot of sense then if he's going to pull a crowd or at least pull people in to watch his fight from New Zealand if they are locals. I would assume that there are locals that were doing that. Hey, if Matt Viley can bring a crowd, why not sign him and put him on a card, a fight night in Auckland or something like that? With Kai Kara France as the headliner, maybe even Dan Hooker. Who really knows? But now we can move on to another fighter. Another trend that you'll notice is that we're talking about a lot of young guys. Australia's got a very good, bright, young future. We will talk about a couple bonus prospects as well. And this is probably where the bonus prospects kind of start because these guys most likely probably won't be on the contender series or looked at for 2024, but probably will be for 2025 and maybe further on for a few guys that we will talk about as well. We're going to talk about Harry Webb, and to my understanding, Benny P, you are very high on Harry Webb, so I'm just going to hand it over to you and let you do all the talking on this fighter.
Thank you, Artem MMA. So yeah, I'm very high on Harry Webb. I haven't been this high on a regional prospect before, so hopefully I'm not wrong on this because I would look really silly. But I've watched this guy's whole pro career. I watched most of his amateur fights as well. The thing you got to notice with this guy, very very similar to featherweight Conor McGregor. The way he fights, his stance, very similar karate stance, but also has very good hands. Very well rounded as well. He uses his grappling for victories. Uh, Mixes up the body really well. Got some power as well. He's got really good cardio, as you'll see. His first win against Oliver Schmidt was a really high-paced fight. Went into the third round where he dominated both the first two rounds, but it was at such a high pace and he didn't slow down at all. Gets the submission, just well-roundedness, composure out of this guy. You would think this guy was a 10-fight pro veteran the way he fights, but this guy's very composed, really good hand-face coordination. Oliver Schmidt throws a spinning head kick at him. His hands are just always perfectly placed. It's really hard to hit this guy, but when he does get hit, he's got a solid chin too. And yeah, I'm just absolutely so high on this guy. I could go on, but people are going to say the dick rating's too crazy. So yeah.
All right, we'll move on from there. Harry Webb, Benny P, a lot more knowledgeable on Harry Webb than me. I will admit I haven't really watched too many of his fights because Hex Fight Series is on pay-per-view. So there we go. I'm waiting for them to come out and then I'll have a look, and then I'll be able to back out to Benny P on that one there. But now we've got another one here. Navajo Sterling from New Zealand, a fighter that probably is going to make quite a few waves in 2024. From City Kickboxing, a guy that is fighting, I believe, at heavyweight and light heavyweight, if I'm not mistaken. But a big time kickboxing background, City Kickboxing connections. Beat Kevin Fittiel in the first round, took him down, slammed him. But Kevin Fittiel is a guy that fought Junior Tuffer and took Junior Tuffer to the second round. Not many people can say that they took Junior Tuffer to the second round. And Navajo went out there and finished him in round one. Very good win there. Just slammed him, and that was kind of the end of the fight, really, to be honest. But Sterling, man, I think that you give this guy a bit more experience, maybe just a couple more fights, and with the hype that all these CKB guys tend to get, you actually might see him in the UFC sooner rather than later, if you really do think about it. Blood Diamond, I guess a bad example, but he was signed to the UFC super early on. Navajo Sterling could get that treatment just because he does seem to have that talent. and the UFC does need more guys in the higher weight classes. And in my opinion, the UFC needs more guys from New Zealand. I think he fills up all of those boxes. What do you think about Navajo, Sterling, Benny P?
Yeah, everything you said there, completely agree. The one thing I found out about this guy recently is apparently he's actually won a bunch of jiu-jitsu tournaments. So I thought this guy was just a striker, but no, he's actually really well rounded too. You wouldn't think it looking at his topology, but really well rounded, really freakishly strong. The way he slammed him and KO'd him, yeah, absolute freak athlete as well. And I think light heavyweight is like his division, but the fact he's lifting up and slamming heavyweights like this, I think he's got a really bright future, especially at light heavyweight. If you watch any interview with like Tyson Pedro, Carlos Olberg, any of the CKB boys, they all talk about how this guy gives them the work in sparring. Obviously, you can't use sparring as the overall, be all for all of it, but he absolutely gives all these guys hard rounds, and he's solid and young, and yeah, I expect this guy to go really far, like you say.
Yeah, I think he's definitely someone to keep your eye out for. Maybe even sooner rather than later. That win over Calvin Fittiel, they made the rounds quite a bit on Instagram as well. It wasn't like a viral win, but it was a win that like a lot of people saw. A lot of people reposted it. I even remember seeing BennyPMMA repost that win. So it definitely got like the attention internationally on Instagram. I mean, I think a reel got quite a few views. So maybe you might have even seen that slam win over Fittiel. Sterling's a guy to keep your eye out for. And another fighter that I'm going to bring up kind of briefly because I've got a couple amateurs to talk about that do train in New Zealand, that are from New Zealand, that could really make a good run in the pro ranks. I believe Benny P told me that Fergus Jenkins is going to be making his pro debut at some point next year, which will be cool because he's only 22 years old and a 12-1 amateur record, fought for the IMMAFA, which is and IMMAF as well, which is a pretty big deal because IMMAF is like the best promotion to fight for as an amateur. Beat a couple guys, beat a couple international guys with some good records as well. Do you have anything to add about this amateur Fergus Jenkins that could be making his pro debut sometime soon?
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely the future of New Zealand MMA. I'm very confident in saying this about Fergus Jenkins. Very well rounded skill set, but obviously the grappling is his go to. And I think we actually probably see this guy debut on the Hex card in New Zealand because Hex is going to New Zealand early next year. So I imagine we'll see this guy debut then. And yeah, I think this guy's going to be a problem. I think I've seen him being training at CKB too. So to round out his striking as well. Yeah, I think this guy's going to be a problem. He's got all the potential in the world.
Wait, that's really good to hear because we've got another fighter that has a lot of potential with a big amateur career, Kasib Murdoch. Now, if I'm not mistaken, Kasib Murdoch actually trains out of Christchurch in the South Island, but he's got a big time amateur record, 10-0, a lot of fights, if not like most of them, for IMMAF, and a lot of good wins as well. I think Kasib Murdoch is a guy to keep your eye out for. Maybe we will see him make a pro debut at some point soon. I mean, he hasn't fought since the start of the year, so maybe he's preparing for some sort of big transition. Maybe that's it. But do you know anything about Kasib Murdoch at all, Benny P?
I'm not going to lie, I haven't seen anything out of Kasib Murdoch, but I'll definitely give him a check out after this video. I'll definitely go check out some highlights.
So I'm going to be fully honest with you. I actually haven't seen a Kasib Murdoch fight before, but I do know that he exists. Anyway, let's move on. Alfred Stoddart. Now, Alfred Stoddart is one of Benny P's Benny P's prospects that he's definitely excited to talk about, and I'll just hand the mic over to Benny P to talk about Alfred Stoddart after I just dropped that absolute bombshell of information there.
So Alfred Stoddart, you're going to look at his record and say, well, he got KO'd this year. Why is this guy on here? But if you look at the guy he lost to, Darcy Vendy, you'll know that name might ring a bell. This is the last guy to beat Jack Della Maddalena. And I reckon losing to Darcy Vendy on the Australian regional scene is one of the best uh, one of the best ways to have success because I don't know, he really is like the Michael Johnson of the regional scene. If you lose to him, you're just going to go on to have success. But that's not my only reason for having Alfred Stoddart here. Alfred Stoddart, solid fighter, really good striking. If you go look at his amateur career, all of his losses are by split decision, very close fights. This guy's striking looked really good against Sam Dobb. And then obviously his last fight went over to New Zealand and knocked out Connor Woodson. Woodman, sorry. And yeah, this guy, absolute solid prospect, really good striking. And I think once he puts everything together, like he did in his last two fights, I think we'll definitely see this guy make some big moves in the middleweight division, especially with how, there's not many, in most countries around the world, the middleweight divisions aren't that great, but this guy does actually have some really good skill, in my opinion.
Sweet. So Alfred Stoddard, a guy to keep your eye out for. And Benny P's pretty high on him, which means he must be pretty good. Hopefully we can see him have a fight early 2024 and maybe just kind of be a bit active, build up that record a bit more, get a bit more experience. The next fighter that we're going to bring up was Ben Johnston, and this is another fighter that you're a bit more knowledgeable on than me, Benny P, but he's a middleweight, and he's a good sized middleweight as well at 6'4". Do you have anything to say about Ben Johnston?
No, I'm kidding. Of course I do. Ben Johnston, very you look at his record and see he got KO'd, but that was actually his only fight at welterweight against Caleb Reithout. I don't think he was fit for that weight class at all. I think he was cutting way too much weight for that weight class. I mean, if you look how big the guy is, really solid striking. He's actually a Muay Thai world champion, but if you look at his record, all rear naked chokes, very well-rounded fighter, and obviously having that CKB connection is just a good reason to have him on this list because, yeah, you have that CKB connection, you're almost always certain in line for some sort of big opportunity, which is why I recommended putting Ben Johnston on here. But really fun style, and yeah, Muay Thai world champion with solid grappling. So, and he's a middleweight, so we need more middleweights.
Yeah, if you're from CKB, I mean, Israel Adesanya and Eugene Bierman will probably find a way to fit you onto a card. We did see that earlier, even this year, very recently, with the French fighter whose name I've forgotten about, Kevin Jesse. Kevin Jesse is an example of that. And yeah, maybe CKB could do something for Ben Johnson if he can get maybe just one more win or something like that. Big time kickboxing background, as you mentioned there, Benny P. That wasn't knowledge that I possessed. That was all Benny P. So thank you for that. And I thought that we'll just finish off the video with a fighter that I think, for me personally, I was actually quite high on Caleb Rideout. Caleb Rideout was a guy that I think Eternal MMA themselves were quite high on as well at one point. But unfortunately, he is coming off a loss recently to Joseph Luciano, who we have actually brought up many times. And he actually has beaten Kevin Ducey in his last win. So he's got good wins. But Caleb Rideout was a guy that Eternal MMA was really pushing. I thought that Caleb Rideout was going to go on to do some big things. And I still do believe that he can go on to do some big things. He's still young. But he is coming off that loss to Joseph Luciano. He's got a big time comeback fight against Alden Bates. I'll let you talk about maybe that upcoming fight against Alden Bates, Benny P, and also just about Caleb Rideout as a prospect in general.
So when I say that I'm more excited for Alden Bates versus Caleb Reithout than some UFC main events, I'm not exaggerating. That fight is going to be fucking bananas. Alden Bates, obviously the first person to beat Jack Della Maddalena, very massive welterweight. If you look at this guy is built like an absolute brick shithouse. I don't know how he makes the welterweight limit, but this guy is fucking absolutely massive. Caleb Reithout, on the other hand, a much smaller welterweight. I actually think I think I've heard that he doesn't even cut weight. He literally just drinks a shit ton of water before he weighs in, and he actually just weighs in at his walk around weight. So obviously, if he gets to the UFC, I think lightweight or featherweight is probably where he would contest. But overall, really fun style, very unorthodox. Uses some really interesting moves, like he'll punch people to the leg, which I've never seen before. Punches people to the arms. A lot of spinning attacks. And he looks very similar to like a really tall, like a taller version of Sean O'Malley. He doesn't fight quite as similar, but yeah, he's definitely got the look and the personality. And yeah, the fact he's winning these fights against massive welterweights like Kevin Doucette, Ben Johnston just shows that this guy's skill is really just, yeah, it's crazy how skilled this guy is considering how undersized he is.
Yeah, Caleb Rideout, and it's funny that you bring up his personality because I do remember, was it Chris Drummond that won at Eternal and was really trying to get that rematch with Caleb Rideout. So maybe that's something maybe we could see potentially. But I remember Chris Drummond, a guy that he lost to. Caleb Rideout really wanted that rematch at some point. Maybe we get that, maybe we don't. But yeah, Caleb Rideout, a guy that I thought would just be quite good to finish off the video with, a guy that is still a pretty hyped prospect. Unfortunately, did lose a little bit of hype with that loss, but I think we're going to see him bounce back at some point soon, and definitely someone to look forward to. And if he really doesn't actually cut weight, 6'2" at lightweight, I mean 6'2" at featherweight, you might have even mentioned. I mean, that's crazy if he can really go out there and make that happen. But thanks for coming on the show, Benny P. Very happy that we managed to get your knowledge on of Australian MMA, and I'm sure we will probably do some more videos in the future. So, do you have anything to add at the very end of the video, Benny P?
Yeah, I definitely. This was a very enjoyable experience. So thank you for having me on here, Artem MMA. And if you liked hearing my analysts work for this video, make sure to give me go and subscribe to my YouTube, Benny P MMA. It also might come up as Benderman 2001. So yeah, thanks for having me, and I really do appreciate this.
All good, no worries. Definitely go and subscribe to Benny P. He makes some good videos, and yeah. With all that being said, I think we'll see you guys in the next one.